In this third video, I will demonstrate how to make bottles and vases by giving shape and form to the cylinders. Bottles and vases are just pots that have had the body expanded and the neck constricted a little bit, and the parts of the pot are the foot, the belly, the shoulder, the neck, and the lip. The magic of pottery comes when putting all these different parts of the pot together so that the pot sort of takes on its own personality, its own individuality. And if you can recognize that, then you're starting to make pots rather than just throw pots. The focus on this video is about form. How we make the form, how we shape the form, how we talk about the form, and what makes a good pot. So I have the basic cylinder, and now I'm going to give some form to it. And there's always a lot of clay that hides down here at the bottom, so I have to squeeze quite hard down at the bottom. Lift that clay up and out. Just the direction of both hands is going to dictate what the form is. And at the same time, I'm thinning the walls and seeing what happens. You sort of make these decisions as you go up the side of the pot. Be sure to keep the top of the pot as narrow as you can. I plan to make this into just a simple vase, but I want to get the clay out of the base here. Accent some of these changes in direction. Keep this in. And this thick rim helps keep everything in center for me. It also gives a nice termination to the top of the pot. There are several kinds of ribs you can use. Give it different texture. It also allows you a little more leeway. When you're throwing just with your hands, you have to keep your fingertips absolutely directly opposite each other. When you throw with a rib, you have a little bit of forgiveness there. And by throwing here and here, I've decided to accent this shoulder. Okay, now to refine the shape farther, I'll take a stick that I can use on the inside because I don't think I can get my hand in there any longer. And I'll use the stick on the inside. First I have to sort of find out where I am. I'm right down here. And then I'll just throw it right against the rib. I want that out a little more. And I want this shoulder to lift up to be more of an arch shape. You can probably reach that. Can't quite reach it all, so I need to lift this up right in there. This is a throwing stick that I make. It sort of looks like a golf club. Some commercial sticks are made with just a rubber ball on the end. And there's a couple other kinds of throwing sticks, but that's the purpose of them all, is to reach in there, and they're usually used just to refine the pot. Now to finish the bottom of the pot, to refine the bottom of the pot, I like this long edge of the throwing stick so I can control this whole shape of the bottom part of the pot. Gives some form to the completed pot. Now we have to stand back and see how all those parts look together. Lift this up. And this is the time when the pot takes on its own little personality. I feel like I want to give this a little accent down here. Give the foot a little more strength to go along with the nice strong shoulder up here. Then we'll see what happens in the glaze firing to make this pot complete. I'll set it off. With this cylinder, I'm going to throw a bottle. The bottle shape is a little more difficult to throw than the vase, only because the opening is so much smaller. You have to constrict the top a lot more. So the same problems that we have in throwing any shape, which is to get the clay out of the bottom. Pinch hard and save enough clay for the top so we can stretch across that long distance from the shoulder to the neck. Keep it narrow. The difficulty here is leaving enough clay at the top and thinning the bottom enough so that the bottom will be thin but still have the strength to resist the torque when you're throwing the neck. I usually like to use rather dry clay here, or stiff clay. It makes it more difficult to center, but when you're working with it and it's thinner, it is stronger than wet clay. If it's too dry, of course, you can put a little water on it. Make sure it's evenly wet. So pinch hard, pinch your fingers together. And I have a tendency to relax right here at that first accent. Squeeze. Touch your hands together as soon as you can. Stretch it out. And bring it back. You can throw down from here to the shoulder, will help keep it centered too. And if you use water on it, just keep it on the rim, so you don't want this to get wet, soften up, and not have any integrity left. Now to collar in this neck even more, what I do is I cross my thumbs, I touch it with my thumbs and my two fingers, and I just choke it gently. Cross my thumbs, touch it with my two fingers, and just choke it, and you have to coax this neck in. To coax this in and up. And the pot will usually get off center at this point, at least the lip will start to waver a little bit because you're compressing that clay and it really doesn't want to go back in there. Throw it down. And up. Before you finish this off completely, you should finish the bottom of the pot with the throwing stick so you can see what kind of shape the entire bottle is going to be, so you can make some decisions about refining the shape. Now with the throwing stick, again I'm going to put this throwing stick on the inside and try to embellish this, try to get this to be a little more filled out. So you can stop and you can find out where you are. I'm down here now, right there. You have to hold your hands tightly against your side so you can do this carefully. It takes a little coordination. Difficulty with throwing bottles is it takes a lot of fussing to get this neck closed, and yet you want it to look spontaneous. And there are a lot of things you can do with the lip here. And like I said, when we choke it in, it usually gets a little bit off center because of the compressing those particles of clay, and that's what we use the needle for. We use this needle tool to cut this off. Don't cut it off at a straight horizontal. Cut it off at a slight angle. It'll appear to be a little stronger that way. You have to do this very gently too, because the torque is going to pull the pot off center. Try not to panic. It's hard not to. That looks sort of nice. Because it's a little extra thin here, or I have some nice clay up here which makes for a nice strong lip, which I want, but when I go to squeeze that, the bottom of the neck is a little bit on the thin side and it wants to torque on me. So I have to work carefully with this. In this one, this whole top here could be called the lip, not just this very top. I just want to refine this shoulder, make this a nice arch sort of thing. The arch is what's holding this pot up at this point. If I cut this in half, it would certainly fall over. So it's the structure of the shape that's holding this up at this point. And I think we have a bottle that we can keep. We can work with these shapes after they're firmed up a little bit. We can square the sides or roll it on the table after it's firm, and or cut facets on it, or do lots of things in it. We could draw in it at this point. We could make little accent marks here. We could define the top. Those are the things that you will learn to add later to make your pots come alive, take on their personalities. But a nice basic bottle shape is a good test of your throwing skill. When I'm talking about torque, I'm talking about the twisting of the clay, or the pressure on the top part of the pot is forcing the bottom part of the pot maybe to twist a little bit. So a lot of times I find myself watching the bottom of the pot while I'm throwing the top part to see that I'm not going to lose it to the torque. I'm not going to lose it by applying too much pressure and forcing the bottom to twist on me. A lot of times you have to take this clay right to the point where you're going to lose it in order to make a nice pot. You're going to have to take it where it almost falls in, but doesn't quite. There's always a moment of truth in there somewhere. You can make some interesting pots like that. You get pots that way that you would never sort of invent. And you're alone in your studio, and who cares if you lose a pot? If you lose it, that's fine. You know, you learned something. After you've thrown the pots and let them stiffen up a little bit, there are lots of things you can do with them to make them more interesting. If you want to, you could sort of square it off, roll it on all four sides. They don't necessarily have to be round pots all the time. Always round off the bottom of your pots here. That will form a sharp edge, and if it gets fired like that, it will be very rough. We paddle it. You can draw in it. If you want to accent some of the shoulder parts. It takes a long time to develop the skills necessary to throw large pots out of a single piece of clay. I want to show you now a method you can use to make large pots by putting two smaller pots together. What I did first was throw a piece of clay, and I opened it up all the way down to the wheel head. And then I slanted the top in and measured the diameter of this pot. Then on the wheel, I threw another pot with about the same amount of clay, and I made sure that the measurement across the top was the same. And I beveled this one in. So now these two pots can go together. You can throw these pots early and let them dry, so they will be sure to hold themselves up. Just be patient and open this up. This works well because there's automatically a lot of clay up at the top here. Now I want to make this seam tight. And that little thickness at the top of at the seam will also be a little reinforcing ring of clay there to help keep this centered for you. Throw it up and you can throw it down. I'm going to choke this in. And this always becomes a little crooked when you're doing that. Anyway, this is a method that you can use to make larger pots out of two smaller thrown pieces of clay. And I think you'll find it's interesting and give you a lot of variety, some shapes you probably would never have thought of before. Another way to make larger pots is to throw a base, allow it to set up a little bit, and then add coils of clay to the base and throw the coils. With that method, you could make as large a pot as you want. Just like everything else in ceramics, it takes a little bit of skill to roll out nice even coils. The secret of rolling a coil is to make sure you roll it over more than once. If you just roll it a little bit like this, it will be oval shape. If you can roll it over as many times as possible using all of your hands. So here are the coils. And here's the pot that I threw a little while ago. It's still stiff enough to stand up. I want to score this inside edge here. Make sure it'll be wet enough to accept that wetter clay coil. I think I'll, just for safety's sake, I'll fasten it down. A little bit. And to add the coil, start a little bit on the inside, add the coils always a little bit to the inside. On the inside, I'm taking my finger, and it's going like this to really try to weld that clay to the previous coil. I'll do it on the outside as well so you can see. Now, just to get the clay centered a little bit, sometimes I use a roller of any kind, and instead of using water, I throw with my finger on the inside and the roller on the outside, so it's taking the place of the water. There are many kinds of rollers you could use. I have also a large caster used for beds, big queen size beds. and I fixed it up, put it in a handle, or there are a lot of wallpaper kind of tools that you can use. Now I could add water to this if I wanted to, but I'm going to see how far I can go without it. First, I want to keep this as dry as possible right now because I have to add more clay to it. So you can see that there's no limit to the size of pot you can make using this method. It'll just take you longer and longer to get each section dried out before you can add another series of coils. There's more to making good pots than just technical skill. You have to learn to balance the parts of the pot so they work well together. An overstated foot or an overstated lip could spoil the whole pot. Even if it's a perfectly good foot, nice belly, if one is out of balance with the other, it doesn't make the whole pot work. The technical skills are obvious at first, and as you throw more and more pots, you will become less and less aware of those technical skills. But to develop your eye and to figure out what is a good pot and what is a bad pot is something that will take some time as well. A good pot has all the parts of the pot in a nice, evenly balanced, or maybe even they're working against each other to make an interesting pot. They always look like, maybe the pot looks like it's going to explode. It's so fat at the top and the shoulders or something, it's going to explode. It has an energy, the tension between those parts of the pot that make it really work well. Pots change in the kiln, and they shrink different, they accept the fire and the glaze differently, and so if you think it's good enough, go ahead and glaze it and fire it. If you're pretty sure that you can throw it better than that, I would go ahead and let the clay be another pot some other day.